Hey, good evening.
Good morning, or whatever it is, midday, I guess, about to you, right?
Yes, yeah. It's 12 o'clock, just like
Yep,
we discussed a
we
long time
planned.
ago.
Yes, good.
It's great to see you, first of all.
Okay, nice to meet you.
Yeah, very nice to meet you. Yeah, I look very much forward to this talk. Like I said, I read your books. I was really impressed by them. Mostly because a lot of thoughts I had about acting morally came back in this book. So first of all, very great to read your books. And as I said before as well, I saw you for the first time a long time ago in Examined Live. And there you said something about us preferring to buy shoes over for example, donating money. And I suppose I always use this quote of yours in a sort of a defense to show how we are sort of hypocrites in the world, which of course is not your point. I got that. But today the sort of the conversation is a little bit about this. Yeah, I don't know, like
Sure.
you have seen my my emails.
Yes, I saw your emails. I saw the little document you sent me about with the drawings and so on. So I
Yes,
have a bit of a sense of what you want, but you're going to have to ask the questions, and I'll do my best to respond.
yes, that's exactly the point. Maybe I'll just briefly explain the worlds we will take place in, because the idea is that we sort of talk from this conceptual world where I'm a pear and you're a tree.
Oh, I'm the tree. I thought I was the pear. I see.
No, no,
You're the
you're the
pear.
tree. Yes, I'm the
Okay.
pear. I'm the pear, and I'm sort of discussing a little bit this if I should participate in this whole situation with
All
saving
right. Okay.
worms. And you're the
Right.
tree. Of course, you're more experienced as a philosopher.
I'm the wise old pear tree.
Yes, that's the plan. Let me just
Right.
explain it, and then if you have questions, please ask, and then I think we can just start and see how it goes. So you probably saw some of these images. You can see this, right?
Yes, I can see it. Sure.
So first of all, the story starts with you as a tree saying that the pear should act morally. Of course, I filled those words in for you, but based on your books, and I can sort of think that you would say this. Then there's one pear together with a few other pears who sort of refuses. He sort of doesn't see the point that much.
Right.
But the pressure increases because I suppose, well, our society might, in human land, might be a bit slower, but in this society, there's sort of more pressure already. So some peers are sort of urging him to come down, but he's still in doubt. So yes, but the consequence of this is that in this story, the worms, they need the pears to create a functioning soil. And for the soil to function, the tree works fine, and therefore the future generations of the pears will continue to grow, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Yep. So I made this little sketch. It's sort of my interpretation of this metaphor for our ethical dilemmas. I sort of wanted to make a story that sort of compresses poverty, climate change, all these ethical dilemmas in this little story. So yeah, the pear, basically his life is hanging in the sun, and if he lives to help the worms, he goes off and he gives part of himself to the worms. I sort of made it interpretable that he gives part of himself or his full self. So that sort of corresponds a bit to your theories about how much should you give, etc., etc.
Right. So can he give a part of himself and still survive? Presumably, pears don't survive.
Yes, so he can, but he will be down, and his life in the sun. He's sort of compromising his life. That's sort of the idea.
Okay.
And then the thing about my pair, there's some sort of quotes I use to construct this story. One of them are from like more absurdist views of life, such as Camus and de Beauvoir. And in a way, of course, we will discuss it soon. In a way, these seem sort of arguments for the pair to sort of say that he can do what he wants. Yeah, so there's a sort of doubt. Then an important detail about the animation, because it's going to be an animation, is that it's sort of visualized in light. So the light is fading with the worms, and this has as a consequence that the soil also is fading, and therefore there is this fear with many pears that also the future generations of the pears will not have the light anymore. Does that make sense?
Yes, I guess so. So it's not just the light of individual pears, it's a larger kind of light that is fading. Is that right?
Yeah, like eventually the fear is that the whole world they live in will go to black without any light.
Right.
It's sort of eventually it's a life cycle, and one pair thinks he should not participate in the life cycle. He can do what he wants, and many other pairs think no, we should stick to the plan and take our part in the life cycle.
Right, I understand that, but what I wasn't clear about is whether it's all going to fade, like the sun is going to burn out, or climate change is going to make it impossible for pear trees to survive. Is there something like that hanging around in the background or not?
No. The sun would just be functioning.
Keep shining. Okay, good. That's what I wasn't clear about when you said the light is fading.
Yes.
Okay.
And then Professor Singer, I would have the question that I can address you as a tree. So I would say, Mr. Tree, and you would answer preferably within this world of pears, which of course is a bit of a struggle sometimes, because I know you normally talk in the human world, and but yes, if it doesn't work, we try it again. And
so do you want me to address you as Mr. Pear?
Yes, or just Pear.
Okay, Pear. Fine. Okay.
And I am among some other pairs, and like I said, the idea is a bit that this conversation gives us the freedom to talk more lightly about these sort of heavy things, and also to you can add things as well if you feel like, okay, I want to add something, or to make my point. It's eventually a world of animation, so you can add something if you want.
Right. Okay. And you're not showing any vision, any of the footage, or you're recording this, but none of this vision will be shown. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Eventually, you will be a tree, I will be a pear, and there will be worms. But we are the ones that speak. The worms are not. There's not a third interview or something.
Right. Good. Okay. Fine.
Okay, let's start. So, Mr. Tree, why would I help the worms?
Well, Pear, you can do a lot for worms, and if you don't, they're going to die. So I think that it's reasonable for you to jump down and help those worms that really need you so badly.
But why would I care about them?
Well, they feel things like you do. They have their lives to live as you do. So I think if you care about yourself and your own interests, you should look at the thing from excuse me. You should look at the whole thing from a broader point of view. You should think not just of yourself, but of all of the other beings in the world who have lives to live. They all matter.
Because I just grew up on this tree. I saw that there's something happening downstairs, and suddenly I have to accept the meaning everyone has here. Suddenly I have to let me try again. I just grew up on this tree, trying to make sense of this universe I'm cast into, with which I haven't had anything to do so far. And why would I keep hanging here and not be part to keep? Oh, sorry. So I'm trying to make sense of the universe, and there's already a meaning, but this meaning has nothing to do with me. I didn't have any influence on this world that is established. Why would I accept the meaning that's already here?
You didn't have any influence on the world that's already established, but you do find yourself in it. So the question is, what would be the best thing for you to do in the world in which you exist? And it's not that I'm trying to force you to accept a meaning. I'm inviting you to think about this meaning. I want you to be a thinking pair, not just a blob hanging from a tree, but a pair who can reflect on your situation and ask yourself, what would really be the best thing for me to do? And I believe the best thing for you to do is to jump down and help the hungry worms and participate in the great circle of life.
I understand that. It's not like I don't want to help the worms. I mean, I can see their suffering. But in a way, I wonder, what is my relation? I could also just choose a life here in the sun. And what is my connection to those worms?
Well, you could choose a life in the sun, that's true. But when eventually your life did come to an end, and all pairs are mortal after all, so your life will come to an end, would you really want to look back on it and think, well, what did I do in my life? Oh, I hung from a branch of the tree and absorbed the sun. Is that really going to be enough for you to feel that you've had a fulfilling and meaningful life when that final day comes?
Well, I agree. That's where sort of my doubt is. Because somewhere, yes, I wonder if I will be happy. But that's just in the end of my life. And as of now, I don't think there's necessarily a penalty for me living the way I do. And why would I care about possible future generations looking back to me and saying that I lived a bad life?
It's true that you could be happy for part of your life, but I think pairs have a natural sense of justice, a sense of what is right and wrong, and I expect that you would participate in that. And eventually you might feel some disquiet in the fact that you hadn't played your role, in fact that the worms had starved because you had not dropped down and contributed to their life. And after all, look at the bigger picture. Perhaps if you don't drop down, the worms don't consume you, the worms themselves don't die, then the very tree that you are hanging to will itself not be properly nourished because the soil will deteriorate. And you would be at least partly responsible for that.
I understand this. So what if I'm so interested in my life in the sun and I don't feel this natural desire to help the worms?
So if you may not feel the natural desire to help the worms, but you are a being capable of thinking. I mean, we are having this conversation, so you must be a thoughtful pair, you must be a rational pair, really. And I think that may cause you some disquiet to know that you could have made a positive difference to the world. You could have helped hungry worms in great need at relatively small cost to yourself, after all. But you chose not to do that. I think there will be some kind of dissonance in your ideas that you can't help but recognize that the way you've lived your life is not a good way to live a life.
I do recognize it partly. The thing is that we don't know the meaning of life. At least that's my view. I add the meaning of life myself. And in a way, it could be for me the meaning that I see the other pairs have. They want to help the worms. They feel that that's a necessity. But how do I, if my view now is that my meaning of life in theory could be to live a gloomy, passive life, how do I transform to this new meaning of life?
You transform to the new meaning of life by opening your mind to these broader considerations. You seem to be very focused on yourself. It's if you're gazing into your core, to the pips inside you. But look outwards, look at the things around you, look at the other beings in the world. And you can think about becoming part of them, not just looking inwards, which, as I said, I feel in the long run you will not find fulfilling or satisfying. But embrace all of that world, embrace everything around it, and become a good part of it that is a positive contribution to making the world a better place.
So you say that in the long run, I will find out that this way of life will not satisfy me, where I'm sort of trying to find a lot of arguments to live the way I do. How do you know that this will not satisfy me?
Well, there are many pair psychologists who've run studies on pairs who have chosen to live as you are proposing to live. And they have found that these pairs are not living particularly happy lives, that there is something missing. Whereas the pairs who drop down and contribute to the world as a whole feel more fulfilled. They are more satisfied with their lives. And this is not just a coincidence. This is something to do with the nature of what it is to be a pair, that you are likely to feel more fulfilled if you play your part.
I see. So in a way, you're actually saying, Mr. Tree, that yes, egoism is sort of a thing that doesn't correspond nicely with ethics. But it's a choice, more or less. It's a choice, the way you live. So it's not so much there's one way to live, but you say there's one way that's better.
Yes, there are many ways to live, and we see people living many different ways, and some of them are egoists. Sorry, I should have said we see pairs living many different ways, and some of them are egoists, and they do have that choice. I'm not in favor of forcing them to change their choices, although sometimes if they really are going to harm others, then I think all of the pairs have to get together and have to make sure that they can't really cause so much harm. For example, that they can't kill the whole pear tree, and so that there will be not only no pears on this tree this season, but there will be no more seasons abundant with pears in the future. So sometimes the group does have to at least enforce some minimal standards away from pure, naked egoism. But as far as possible, I think we can live with egoistic pairs, and we should rather appeal to the good sense, good conscience, good reasoning of the vast majority of pairs who do see what is a good way to live. And if you choose not to do that, well, ultimately, I think that will be your problem, because I think enough pairs will choose to live the right way to bring about a better world for all pears, all pear trees, and all of the worms living in the soil beneath them.
So, Mr. Tree, if eventually I don't follow the path you just sketched, the path where I do take care of the worms, and eventually many pears like me will do the same, how bad is it? How bad is it that the light will fade? Isn't it something we could accept? I'm sort of referring here to the party and go thing. And yeah, isn't it something we can accept, that the world ends? We just accept it. There's no more tree, no more worms, no more pears.
No, I think it would be a tragedy if we were to accept that. I think that the life of the pear tree and the pears and the whole forest and the community that depends on that forest is a very good thing. There is a lot of joy and happiness in that community, and it could continue for hundreds, thousands, perhaps even millions of years. But if a selfish generation of pears say, no, they're not going to contribute to that, they're not going to feed the worms, so the worms will die, so the trees will die, so the forest will die, that would be a great tragedy. There would be something lost. The universe would be a cold and dead place instead of a place that has life and happiness and fulfillment and the advancement of thought and progress for everyone. Who knows what wonderful futures there could be for all pears, as long as we can continue to develop and evolve over millennia or millions of years into the future.
Yes, because I don't necessarily like this idea either. It's not that I look forward for the tree to die and for the pears to stop growing. But sometimes I do wonder why? And in this process of why, there's never this complete answer. So how do I deal with that?
There may not be a complete answer in the sense of an answer that is absolutely conclusive, that will convince everyone. We have to look at how we judge the balance of probabilities. Probability is always the guide to life for all pears. And we have to think, how does it seem to me? Does it seem to me self-evident that the positive experiences of pears are things of value, that we should try to preserve those positive experiences and make sure that there are going to be more of them? And that in contrast, the agony of trees like me or pears like you, when they are shriveling up and dying because the soil is inadequate to support them, that's a very bad thing, and we should strive to avoid that.
Because let's say I do jump down, I give part of myself to the worms, and eventually I found out it doesn't satisfy me either. What would be happening then?
Well, what would be happening then is that you are not satisfied, unfortunately, and I accept that as regrettable, but that nevertheless you are contributing to the satisfaction of the worms and thereby to the tree and to future trees and future generations of pears and of trees. So I would still see it as a good thing that you jumped down. I would regret the fact that you were not satisfied yourself. That's a pity, but it is part of the greater good. And so I think it would be a mistake for me to say it would have been better if you had not jumped.
Is this doubt of the pear, is it something in your own thought process as a tree, but before you maybe once were a pear? did you go through the same thought process, or is this a way of thinking that's not familiar to you as a tree?
No, I have had my doubts about the lack of ultimate meaning in the universe, what we make of the universe if it doesn't have a purpose. In the absence of religious belief, I think we can't have the comfort of hoping that there is an afterlife for pears. I think we know that we fall to the ground and eventually we rot and there's nothing more. We don't survive that. So many people, that does lead to a kind of a despair, a sense that it is all meaningless. But I thought myself through that. I felt that as long as there are positive experiences in the world, and especially, of course, if those positive experiences outweigh the negative experiences, then this is a world that we can identify with, that we can improve, and that we should want to be part of, and we should want to identify with that great tradition of pears who have left the world a better place than it was when they came into it.
Thank you. Could you maybe put the microphone a little
higher, like that?
I think yes. Thank you. So thank you, Mr. Tree. So what do we do with hypocrites? I've met many pears on this tree that they claim that they want to help the worms, but eventually they give too little. That's why I sometimes prefer this hard and consistent opinion, where I just say, I don't care, apparently.
I can see that it may seem more consistent to just say you don't care, and I can see why that is more attractive than being a hypocritical pear who pretends to be doing good, but actually does no good or very little good, and is really just thinking about hanging there off the tree in the sunshine. But I don't think we have to face that choice. I don't think we have to face the choice between being completely locked into ourselves and our present desires or being a hypocrite. I think we can make a substantial contribution to leaving the world a better place. It doesn't have to be entirely a self-sacrifice. We can still enjoy our life, but we can sincerely do something substantial to making sure that the worms are fed, the soil is good, the trees go on. That's all that is really asked of you. You know, you don't have to feel that this is the sacrifice of everything that is pear-shaped about you.
Thank you. So, in how far do you think these opinions about some of the pears seem to sort of claim that there's now a finished rationalization, and this finished rationalization sort of gives problems when it comes to ethics, just like this absurdist view also challenges the ethics. So how do we deal with this ambiguity of ethics when it comes to this situation of saving the tree and the worms?
I'm not sure that I really understand what the ambiguity is that you're referring to here.
Well, I'm referring to the fact that this world is based on its context. So we live in a time now where we might think this is the most important thing for us to do. But of course, it's based on the social structures that we have now. And that's what I mean with the ambiguity. There's some sort of borders that within where our ethics sort of live, if that makes sense.
I'm not sure that I see the ambiguity still. obviously our decisions are influenced by the society we live in, by the social structures and cultures. But I also think that we're capable of thinking beyond them. We're not tied to them. If we were tied to them, they would not change. We would not have any reformers or pioneers who moved beyond their culture. So I believe that each of us, every pear hanging from the tree, has the possibility of escaping that structure and thinking about things in a way that you could relate to some of the great ancient pears who wrote the earliest philosophical tracts, or pears who come from different cultures, who come from the Far East, the Asian pear perhaps, or pears who come from the New World, the United States. I think as long as we have pears capable of thinking, as long as we can communicate and be rational, we can find objective truths that are not bound to any particular pear-shaped culture.
So do you believe that the cause of one pear is the cause of pear kind? Like, should we all have the same cause in this dilemma?
Well, I would not even speak of pear kind as the ultimate standard. I think that is still speciesist in the end. Just because we're pears doesn't mean that we should only care about other pears. Or just because I'm a pear tree doesn't mean that I should only care about other pear trees. I should care about apricot trees and apple trees and nectarine trees and even trees that don't bear fruit, as long as they're capable of enjoying their life, or for that matter, of experiencing misery in their lives. I think we should all care about their interests. We should give equal consideration to their interests, irrespective of their species. And so the world that I'm looking for and the ethic that I believe we ought to follow is one that seeks to reduce suffering wherever we find it and promote happiness wherever it can be experienced.
So if I accept that point and we see all the suffering, mostly the worms, that's the clear visible thing that is suffering. Why are we not doing everything? Why, if that sort of binary construction switches to, okay, I should act, I should help them, why don't we run instead of walk? Why don't we jump faster? Why don't we do everything we can instead of keeping this nice life in the sun?
You know, when I was a really young sapling, I thought that we should do everything, that we should grow as fast as we can, produce as many pears as we possibly can, make sure they all jump down to feed the hungry worms. But as I got older and maybe a little wiser, I realized that that was asking too much of everybody, that people were simply going to shrug their branches and say, no, that's not for me. If life is so demanding, it's better that I just ignore it and just focus on myself. And as that's not a good outcome, I decided instead to suggest an ethic that is less demanding and more realistic to pear nature, something that pears and all of the other fruits too, and maybe all of the other sentient beings can accept and act in accordance with. And that is that we do something substantial to make the world a better place. But we shouldn't feel that we have to do everything, that we have to do so much that eventually we'll collapse, and perhaps even we'll collapse sooner rather than later and accomplish less than if we paced ourselves, grew a little more slowly, produced fewer pears with each season, but over the long run, produced a greater total number of pears and therefore nourished a greater number of hungry worms.
So, because Mr. Tree, you once said that generations after us, pears after us, they might look back and they might say, oh, the pears didn't do anything. They were so slow. But you still think they would accept our method now because they understand that otherwise it would have collapsed sooner?
I would hope that they would. If they acknowledge that we did our part to try to not leave the world a worse place for them, that would be the main thing. That we inherit this world from the pear trees of the past, and we should pass it on in as good condition to the pear trees of the future. But if we don't contribute, if we leave the soil depleted, so that it will be very, very difficult for pear trees to flourish for many centuries to come, if they survive at all, then I think the future generations can rightly blame us for not doing enough.
So if we think of the opposite, we manage, all the pears do their part, or at least most of them. We feed the worms. We feed them so nicely that the world starts becoming a very nice and shiny place, bright. What should we hope of that world? What would it give us? What would it give us, this sort of utopian life?
Well, it's a vision in which all of the pear trees can flourish, and all of the other fruit trees as well, and all of the creatures that depend on the fallen fruit, the worms and others. And we would not have to see the suffering that we see in the world as it is at present. So I think that would be a much better world. I would be very happy if I felt that I had contributed to a world like that.
So how do I know as a pear that I did enough? That I did enough to help the worms?
It's a difficult line to draw, I agree. But you could ask yourself this question: suppose all of the pears did as much as I do. Would the world become better? Would we be steadily marching towards that goal of a world where all of the sentient beings are flourishing? If we would, then perhaps you've done enough. You might still want to do some more if you feel so inclined, but you wouldn't have to castigate yourself and feel that you're a really bad tree because you didn't do as much as you should have.
Yes, because I think that's partly the difficulty, isn't it? That somewhere you can always do more. You can always give your full self. And there's not really, except for the moral ethics, there's not really a judge who is going to say, okay, you've done enough, you did well.
Well, there's no ultimate judge, that's true. Maybe the forest will indicate with the rustle of its leaves whether you have done enough or not. But some people will be too deaf to hear that. So, yes, it's true. You could fail to do enough and not be adversely judged by others. But in the end, I think most pears will know whether they've done enough or not.
So if I now, as a pear, I'm sort of, I don't know, I'm a distance away from these worms. What if I now feel too far removed? What would be my first step to investigate this moral dilemma?
Well, I think you should ask yourself, Pear, why distance is so important. I mean, do you really think that the duties of a pear on a low-hanging branch, let's say hanging down full of pears so low that it almost brushes the grass beneath, that their duties are greater than a pear that just happens to grow on one of the upper branches, far from the grass and the worms? I think if you reflect on that, it doesn't really make sense to say that you have different duties just because of the geographical distance between you and the worms beneath.
All right. It's going all right. It's good. I just
Good.
I go through my script a little bit as to make sure I get all the parts.
Sure.
Do you agree there's some sort of absurd lightness about life that sometimes can be pleasurable this absurdness of life that makes life sort of bearable.
So you're talking about the unbearable lightness of being a pear, is that correct?
Yes, exactly, yes.
I don't really feel that, perhaps because I am aware of the rest of the universe beyond my own skin and beyond my own bark as a tree. I'm aware of all of the other trees in the forest and all of the worms and all of the sentient beings. And so I would not describe my being as light. I would rather describe it as significant because of what it means for all of these other beings and for the future as well.
Does it make that your life as a tree heavy, too heavy maybe sometimes?
Well, that's a balance that has to be struck. I think all of us trees have to think about the balance between being too light and too heavy. We have to allow ourselves some time for holding our leaves up to the sun and enjoying the warmth of the sun, and reaching down for the water with our roots and enjoying quenching our thirst that way. But life can't be only about that. We have to find a meaning in it. And each of us strikes that balance perhaps at a different point, but there's a range of possible points to do that.
So what would you say if the point that I, as a pear, realize is almost in my last stages of decay, when I'm already starting to rot? What would that mean if I come to the realization in that part of my life?
If you come to realize the significance of your life, you mean when
and the things I could have done, too late.
Well, I think that would be devastating. You would realize that you had not lived your life well, and I think that would be sad for you. Of course, you might have enjoyed parts of your life. You might still see value in the fact that you're able to get that enjoyment, but I think in the end, it would not be a satisfying life for you, and you would have deep regrets in those last moments as you decay.
So, Mr. Tree, I heard you speak, and in many ways, I suppose somewhere in my pear mind, I agree with you. But still, it's so simple to, after hearing you speak, to just keep hanging here, to just ignore it somehow. What would you say to me to act, to start acting? What would be, I mean, you might have come across more pears like me who said yes, but eventually they didn't come to action.
There are always pears who have words rather than deeds, but I think we have to judge and be judged the deeds rather than the words. So I have come across other pears like you, that's true, with these dads, and I've come across some who, despite everything that I've said to them, did not change, left it too late. Some of them then had those regrets as they were decaying, as we just discussed. And I accept that I cannot persuade every pear to jump at the right moment. But you're a thoughtful pear. We've had a deep and meaningful discussion. I think that you may understand better that this is a good time for you to jump, that you've had a good and rich life hanging on the tree. Now it's time to open yourself up for the new experiences that will come when you jump.
So if I would go back to the beginning, Mr. Tree, and I would ask you to sort of speak to the new grown pears, more like you're starting the conversation to the pears, tell them sort of what their life could be about. And then actually I start talking to you like we just did. So what would you say to these pears as a sort of a speech in the beginning to them?
Pears, you have your whole life in front of you. You are small, hanging on the branches. You will grow, you will swell, you will enjoy the sun. But this is a time when you are open to important life-changing decisions. So I want you to think about those decisions. I want you to think about what your ultimate values are and what you really want to live for, whether you just want to bask in the sun or whether you want to live a life that leaves the world a better place than it would have been if your blossom had never been pollinated and you had simply fallen away before any real fruit had fallen. Sorry, before any real fruit had formed. So now that you are forming, I think you have this opportunity to do good in the world. And I hope you will recognize those values and swell to some purpose, not just for yourself, but for others as well.
Thank you. So this is more of a side step. But Mr. Pear, you also, or Mr. Tree, you know that I'm an artist as well. I created this story. Some say that an artist should not interfere with the world. And you might consider yourself also an artist in some ways. Do you agree with this view that an artist should not interfere?
I certainly don't agree with the view that an artist should not interfere. I would ask, what is the point of art if it doesn't change the world in some way and hopefully change the world for good? I don't think art can have intrinsic value independently of the effect that it has on others. So although art that preaches too obviously may not be the highest form of art, still any kind of art must aim to have an impact on the observer, even if the impact is only appreciation of the beauty of the art or being led to think about something profound that the viewer would not have thought about otherwise. So I think the role of art is certainly, like our role should be, to move the world in a positive direction.
Because as you know, I also like to hang here. I like to observe the world. But what would you say about just observing? Would that be a bad thing?
Passively observing the world without trying to change anything or participate in the processes that make the world better, I think that would be too self-indulgent. I don't think that would bring out the best of Pear nature to do that.
And what should I do with the pressure that the other pairs are putting to me? They're calling me to jump. They're calling me to come down. Is that the right way?
We shouldn't yield to peer pressure. That's often something that might lead us to do the wrong thing because the crowd can be mistaken. And in any case, just acting to please your peers is not really the best way to live. I think you should think for yourself. And it may be that you come to the same conclusion as the other peers, but it will still be your conclusion. And you will do it because you see it as the right thing to do, not because of peer pressure.
All right. How do you like it?
It's fun. It's one of the weirdest interviews I've ever done, but
yes, true.
It's kind of fun.
The thing is that many of the questions I normally would ask, I know because I've seen your interview. So
right.
For me, this is also different, but it's. I think you're doing very good. You know, like I sort of actually, in a way, like I understand this Pear getting stuck in this sort of option in life to say yeah, life doesn't have a meaning. I can do what I want.
Sure.
I sort of was always curious what you would say, because also I felt it was a bit of a cheap argument. Like, okay, whatever, but life has no meaning, so you cannot call me to responsibility.
Right. Yeah.
Is that something you recognize? Like yeah, it's a weak thing to do. It's a weak thing to, because also it makes life sort of bearable, I think, if you live with the idea that you should not think about everything too heavy, because then yes, things can become quite heavy.
It's one way of getting through life. Sure, that's true.
Because you as a tree, you also make hard decisions sometimes in your philosophy. Like you're not about helping everyone everywhere. You sort of think in a effectiveness. Could you explain this effectiveness as a tree?
Well, a tree should think about the problems that trees face and should aim to solve those problems that, on the one hand, are important. So perhaps problems that have significant impact, that are large-scale problems, but also problems that are tractable. That is, problems that a tree can solve. There's no point in a tree trying to solve problems that are insoluble, or, for example, to do things that maybe a whale would do in the ocean. Trees are not whales, and we can't do things that whales might do. So I think as trees, we should say, is this an important problem? Is it a problem that I could do something about and maybe succeed? And I might also ask, is it a problem that's already being dealt with? Because a lot of other trees are working on this. So I don't really need to make a contribution. Whereas perhaps there's some other problems that are neglected by all of the other pear trees and the other fruit trees. And I can make a big difference there. If that's the case, then I should focus on that, on a problem that is important, tractable, and neglected. That's the kind of problem that I, as a pear tree, ought to be trying to solve.
So do you see there's still space for other pears to become a tree, to take their own meaning, to edit things that you're not capable of doing somehow, and maybe new pears?
Yes, I'm sure that there is space for more pear trees and future generations of pear trees in particular. After all pear trees are mortal. We will grow old. We will develop rot inside our trunk. Limbs will drop. And eventually one spring will come along and we will no longer sprout new leaves. And perhaps a forester will come along and say, oh, this tree has died. Get rid of it. And then there's room for another tree to grow in its place. And the cycle continues.
All right. Thank you, Professor Singer. I think that was it. That was the idea.
Okay, good.
Very
good.
Yeah, thank you for joining, because I can understand a few months back it was an unusual request. I am quite aware.
It was weird.
I'm quite aware, but
okay.